our new director of Camp Blue Ridge, Tony Reyes, Stewardship and Plan Giving Director, and Fred Warfield, who is our Human Resources Director. And I'd like to make mention of two individuals who are making things happen here with technology. Frank Cox, who is our IT Director back there, and his associate, Adil Bach. And I don't think, I've been checking people out, they've been coming in, so I think I hit everybody. We do want to extend a warm welcome to you. We appreciate you being here. Communication is so important. We want you to be warned, but also to share with us as well. So thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn the time over now to Elder Warren.
Yeah, thanks for coming at the end of the Sabbath. And it's good to have some of our pastors and teachers here as well. And I see that Dwight and Kelly and Becky and, of course, with Jose. And Sonia serves, his dear wife, serves on our union committee as our representative from the Potomac Conference as well. And so it's good to have our other employees. Of course, we want to say thank you to the Manassas Church for allowing us to come and be part with Pastor Randy Davis as well. It's good to have Vince here as well from Solid Rock. And we have Kim here, who is also serves on our executive committee. And so we have a variety of individuals who are coming in here. So it's good to have you here. Thanks for coming as well as we're going to have a little bit of time just to talk about the church. Now, we're going to have a few presentations, but a lot of it is also going to be open time in case you have some questions. If they're hard questions, I'm just going to ask Pastor Davis or one of the other pastors to come up, Jose, to come up and answer it. And that's the way it goes, so just be ready, guys. No, there's so many things to celebrate, is there not? What God is doing. And we're going to be sharing some of those things. But I'd like to start off this evening with just a few thoughts. And it comes from, it comes from a parable, a story that Jesus tells and told so well. It's a short one. He tells two short parables in Matthew chapter 13. Right in the middle. He's got some other all around. Most of Matthew 13 is parables. But right there in the middle, he tells two parables. They're each one verse long. But they're both on the same theme. And that's what I'd like to just spend a moment or so focusing on. And that is the parable of the hidden treasure and the merchant in search of a good pearl. Both of them did the same thing. When they found what they thought they had, they did what? You remember? Sold everything. That's the value they saw in them. And so the question I have for you, what to you is treasure? What would be to you that you would be willing to sell everything for? Now there's a different perspective. Some of you may know that and follow some of the fires maybe out in California. The ones in Paradise, California is where I first served in pastoral ministry. That was my first assignment. Well, as many of you know, that town has been pretty well wiped off the map. All the teachers lost their homes but one, and all the pastors lost their homes in that community. It's a church of about 1,500 members. And as I called them, I talked to some of them, and it was interesting. They only had a few minutes to figure out what they were going to take with them. And I had asked them, well, what did you decide? Because what you decide to take with you is that of what? It's the most valuable to you. And the most important thing, bar none, they wanted to make sure family got out. And you notice in the reports, when they give us the reports on the news, they always tell us how many people are missing or died. Why? What really is the most valuable that we have is people. And in the context of this parable, Jesus is talking about people. That really is of the greatest value. We're going to get into that in just a moment. But a couple of things maybe to stir your pure thinking here. Back in 1990, that dealt with some money and some gambling and some real estate. And they thought that it would be good to try. So they went to a company called Milton Bradley. And they presented their idea to them. And you may recognize their idea. Milton Bradley thought it was the stupidest idea that they had heard of. And so they said no. And so they went to Parker Brothers. And 250 million games later, Parker Brothers has written this game for their treasure. Well, the other is called Trivial Pursuit. Parker Brothers said that games later has been sitting on Trivial Pursuit and many others. So who determines what treasure is? How do you figure out what treasure is? What is of value? Here's a place that most of us probably would not recognize, but it recently sold. But there was a gentleman, a Russian, who thought he might want to buy this villa in Europe. So he had to put, for the down payment, non-refundable, 50 million euros. As he got through the process, he decided he didn't want it. Are you ready to walk away from 50 million euros? He did. He left it on the table. This place sold for $1.2 billion. Treasure. Or how about a Picasso, 1955 Picasso? How much, is that a treasure? Well, as someone looked at that treasure, and they went to the auction, at Christie's auction, it sold for a whopping $179 million. That's a treasure. Is it worth that? $179 million. And then, of course, one of my favorite kind of idiosyncratic ones is Warren Buffett put out on the web here just this last year, 2018, he says, for an auction for one of his charities, he says, I will auction off a meal time with me, a lunch time. And someone paid to have lunch with Warren Buffett, $3.3 million to have lunch with him. Of course, then there was Stephen Hawking. He recently passed away, an incredible physicist and stuff. And so they put his wheelchair up for auction. That's an interesting treasure. Somebody that might want a wheelchair. And this wheelchair auctioned for just over $395,000. What's treasure? What is treasure? Within the culture that you and I live, there's a lot of emphasis on different things as to what treasure might be. But in the context of Scripture, what is treasure? God's kingdom is like treasure hidden in a field. Christ's Object Lessons talks about this parable. And Jesus applies, and as does Ellen White, she picks up on a dual or a double. We'll see what it is. The parable of the merchant man seeking goodly pearls has a double significance. It applies not only to men as seeking the kingdom of heaven, but to Christ as lost humanity. The person next to you is God's treasure. And so the beauty of what he is talking about in these parables is the beauty of people. And we're going to spend some time looking at the treasures that God has placed in our territory, the conference, that are treasures. And sometimes I have to be reminded as to what really is treasure. Sometimes when I'm flying and I'm standing in front of a United counter, I don't feel like the travel agent is a treasure of Jesus. I find them to be an impediment sometimes to my progress. But that person on the other side is what? It's a treasure. They are a treasure. God's treasure. And how do we treat his treasures? How do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as his treasure? Jesus sees us as his treasures. And so the privilege that we have is, do we as a church, as God's church, God's remnant church, do we see others for us to consider?